You're looking for the flavor of the coffee. And as long you're looking to avoid the bitterness of the coffee. If you put inferior coffee in the product, you're going to end up with an inferior taste. If you stick to good quality Arabica coffees, which are roasted to the right degree, you will end up with a cup which has strength and flavor and a good aroma.
There's an Irish saying, "May the only thing brewing be your coffee." If only that were true for Gibraltar. The Rock's people have suffered sieges, battles, epidemics, the frontier closure, yet from all of that, a successful economy has blossomed, thanks in no small part to some innovative and resilient businessmen and women. And this is their story. And we started, as most of us start our day, with a cup of coffee. A coffee 125 years in the making, and that delicious aroma is the smell of freshly and locally produced coffee. Like many successful local businesses, SACARELLOS is a family-run business. It was set up by some northern Italian immigrants who came to Gibraltar in search of a better life in the early 19th century. So we'll put some important dates.
Well, the first Sacarello arrived in Gibraltar in 1815 and got married at St. Mary the Crown. Curiously enough, with a lady who was also from the northern part of Italy, Bignoni. But it was my grandfather who established B. Sacarello Limited in 1888, and he bought the building in 1906 in 57 Irish Town. And he was the one who sort of really got the Sacarello business going in Gibraltar, the B. Sacarello Limited.
My ancestors came from Genoa originally, northern Italy, like many other families. And in 1888, they were a company of mainly food wholesalers. From what I gather, my grandfather in the early 1900s learned about coffee roasting in Cádiz and started roasting in Gibraltar as a result of that.
We got into the coffee trade around 1910 when my grandfather, who was a great businessman, he saw roasting coffee coffee being roasted in Cádiz, and he got the idea of concentrating the business on being a wholesaler of general provisions from Irish Town to concentrating on coffee.
And ever since then, coffee has been our mainstay. It has been the mainstay of the business. After the Spanish Civil War, there was a lot of shortages of food commodities in Spain. A lot of coffee was sold in the 40s, and since then the business changed because instead of being food wholesalers, we concentrated on coffee because it's such a volume.
And subsequently, my father, developed the roasting of coffee in Gibraltar, and with the shortages in southern Spain, and even Madrid, our coffee, roasted coffee, was a great success, coinciding with the shortages in southern Spain. Our coffee became synonymous in southern Spain with good quality. There was a roaster in Algeciras who even used the background of the rock as a symbol of good coffee. We had become a symbol of good coffee. And not only that, but in Gibraltar there were other roasters. There was Russo, Perez, Torres, I've discovered even recently. So it became a big business, you know. 30 tons of coffee a week in our heyday we sold.
The history of Gibraltar is a lot of upheaval, especially with our neighbour Spain, and as we are at present, it's problematic. Our business has suffered as a result of that. We've had to adapt and diversify and change. Just as when Spain suffered after the Civil War in the 40s, there was a scarcity of products. Gibraltar benefited.
My father had a very tough time having to sort of take over the business at an early stage without wanting to. His chosen career was being an engineer, but his mother pointed at his desk and said, "This is your desk." And he realized that the business wasn't being managed properly, and he had to get rid of 2 uncles and the family Rolls Royce. The uncles had convinced my grandmother could afford to buy, and so he got rid of this. Not only that, the business went through such touch times, the bank called in their loans and he had to sell a couple of houses, one in Main Street and the other one in Parliament Lane. Clearly my grandfather was a great businessman to have accumulated these houses. My father went through a very tough time bringing up the business. And I remember he told me that one day the manager of Barclays Bank sort of congratulated him, for he saw that his efforts were bearing fruit. But my father never forgot that he had to sell 2 houses because of pressure from the banks. So he started that way, and he brought up the business to a point where he was able to sell a lot of coffee per week. And he did well, and on that basis he sent 4 of us sons to school in England.
We still have the roasting machinery from the 30s, the 40s. That would be the major start of the sales of coffee, that we had a very good reputation in Spain for our coffee.
Ships used to call in especially to Gibraltar directly with raw coffee from Brazil. Such was my father's success. And his success was such that in the famous Cádiz Carnival, there were songs about La Negrita, which was a sort of woman who was on our coffee packaging. So coffee was a sort of symbol of good coffee in the whole of the south of Spain.
The biggest challenge, I would say, was the biggest effect on the business would have been the border closure in '69, when my father lost his staff and the whole thing changed overnight. That would have been a massive upheaval. It was very restricted. We had to diversify from coffee into importing other products to distribute. This is why we ended up going into wines and detergents and other food products to increase our turnover. But it was very difficult in those days.
But with the closure of the frontier, we went to about, less than 1% of what we originally were selling. I think the biggest challenge for the family business was coping with the less demand of coffee from Spain, with the closure of the frontier, adapting to a closed frontier, and subsequently my father diversified into bringing in other plastic products.
We must have had a very tough time in the 70s. That must have been the worst time for the business. Everything was imported from UK, and also we managed to import other products from Spain. We then diversified into wines. We brought in, we started bringing in foods, ambient foods, and also detergents from Spain and other products.
Gibraltar always goes through wet and sunny days with the border and whatever. In other words, make hay whilst the sun shines. This may not last. And he was proved right with the closure of the border.
My brother Patrick and I returned in the 70s after university and started working in the business. Late 70s, I came back completely in 1981.
Well, I studied my A-levels in England, and then I tried banking, chartered accountancy, and then I tried a degree in Spanish literature and Latin American literature. And I then got a part-time job teaching in Gibraltar. I then got an advertising job in Madrid, but I didn't last long, and I sort of ended up back in Gibraltar and back in the family business. My father had got very frustrated with me at trying all these different things, and he always used to say, come to the University of Life, come to Irish Town, the business in Irish Town. And he's been proved right, because I've been there ever since.
Then when my brother came back and I came back, it was sort of new blood, new ideas which were transformed the business. It's a very dynamic product in the sense that we roast the coffee every week. It's not something which is mass produced. We take a lot of care in the production, in the blending, in the roasting, in the preparation of the product.
I slowly warmed to it when I realized it was a fantastic natural product from different parts of the world, mainly Latin America or Africa, and that there was a whole sort of artisan sort of procedure in turning it into a roasted coffee bean. And I learnt from my father how to roast coffee, and from a Brazilian in London at the International Coffee Organization Institute. And I learnt all the whole process of the art of roasting coffee and how to bring out the magic of coffee, different coffee flavors, by releasing the coffee at different points. And I realized it was a sort of a very artisan type of business. And satisfying when you saw people in the home or in cafes or restaurants enjoying coffee.
Charts of the demography of the Gibraltarians, the Genovese column is a predominant one, yes. You must realise that the sea lapped the walls along the entire length, so in fact Irish Town would be just almost on the waterfront. All that changed after the construction of the dockyard in the late 19th century. And so all the main merchants' warehouses and so on logically had to be there. You had Cooperage Lane as well, and all the main businesses were concentrated in that road. What I can't answer you is why Irish Town. A lot of people have been asked that so many times. There is no actual documentary evidence. Logically, I suppose it's because certain Irish merchants occupied, just as the Portuguese had Portuguese Town further up in town. initial opening was for pedestrians only. That was in 1982, and then it opened fully in 1985. There was a lot of apprehension in Gibraltar. After 16 years of being cocooned and suddenly being opened up to the world again, a lot of people were worried about how this would affect, economically, would affect local businesses. Following the pedestrian-only opening, the Gibraltar Chamber of Commerce complained that whereas visitors could not take back into Spain any goods they bought in Gibraltar, there were no restrictions on Gibraltarians going over there and buying goods there at a cheaper rate. All they had to do was pay duty coming back. And this had an adverse effect. Sir Joshua Hassan, in fact, pointed out that this was causing a loss of £2 million a year in revenue to Gibraltar businesses. So obviously the initial opening had some adverse effects on trade in Gibraltar.
But when the border opened in 1982, we were able to continue and increase our sales of coffee because naturally the Gibraltar market became, the Gibraltar economy became increased. So we were able to sell more to all the bars and restaurants, hotels, and also the supermarkets.
Why did we sort of decide to change what was mainly in the 20th century a coffee warehouse where coffee was packed and ground into a coffee shop and then subsequently a restaurant? We realised with the frontier opening in 1982 for pedestrians that there was a future for a coffee shop.
Coffee shop, wine shop, because my brother was very keen on the wines. He had come across this shop, as I say, in Madrid, seen how they were selling coffee in Madrid.
I realised we could have the packets full of different roasted coffees with a little roaster in the shop so people could see the coffees roasted weekly, so they could have fresh Colombian, Brazil, Costa Rica, apart from our own blends. You know, making people aware, like fresh bread, that they could have fresh coffee. I was aware that we had a great building, an early 19th century merchant house, which Boschetti, the famous Gibraltar architect and builder, had designed with the typical Genoese arches and window shutters. And so we converted, with the great help of John Langdon, the architect, this old warehouse into first a coffee shop, where people could taste our coffees, roasted, hand-roasted in Gibraltar. And subsequently, as it was successful, we extended into doing lunches, and then in '94 we extended the cafe into also a restaurant, opening out the back of the warehouse, and so it's become a coffee shop restaurant.
I'm running the side of the business which is distributing the coffee, and that's obviously our market there is selling to the main supermarkets in Gibraltar and also most of the bars and cafes in Gibraltar, whereas Patrick is involved in the running the catering operation, which is also very important.
In Irish Town here we've got a fine historic, typical Gibraltar Italian business. Collection of paintings from Gibraltar artists or pictures I bought in Latin America.
It's a case of the ingredients, getting quality ingredients, going for Arabica coffee, which gives you the flavour, and getting the right blend of a coffee which has flavour and strength.
The art of the barista, that coffee is considered almost universally to be at its finest, made in a typical Italian espresso machine. In my time, since I joined the company in 1975, our major source was from Colombia, and Colombian coffee has got a very good reputation.
And then last year in November, I followed in the family tradition and went with my son Jonathan and spent a great week in Nicaragua, which was a real eye-opener, seeing the whole process and seeing the source of the product. And that first floor was full of grinders. There were about 10 grinders, and the coffee would go into the grinders and would be picked up below. So you can imagine there'd be about 20 people grinding coffee all through the back of the restaurant. In terms of the coffee industry, we are possibly relatively unique in the sense that we do the whole process. We are bringing in the raw coffee, making our own blends, roasting them freshly every week, and then we are selling to bars, even to our own bar, where we're making the final product. So we're doing the whole thing. We're servicing the machinery, looking after the bars and making sure that the machines are well looked after to produce the final cup which the client gets. So it's a microcosm of the whole coffee industry. Also, that we have a small roaster within the cafe brings the industrial part of the business there. It's always a dynamic process. It's you know, one day you do it brilliantly, the next day you might not do it so well. It's a case of getting the temperature right and making sure that you don't lose control of it, you know. But
I suppose like cooking,
it's like cooking,
you
exactly.
need to know your oven.
Exactly. Because one day you'll do it better than others, but the thing with a coffee is to get it consistent.
One of the key selling points of Gibraltar as a tourism destination is its heritage value, and SACARELLOS has an example retained its vitality as a focal point of interest for people to enjoy the lunches, enjoy the coffees, the meetings with friends and with family, and of course also to participate in the richness of Gibraltarian life, like for example having discussions of in town without my car, poetry readings, also doubling up as an art gallery. It's not just a coffee shop, it's very much a live establishment.
My main objective is to diversify further locally into other products and look at the possibilities of expanding the coffee sales. And to do that, I think it's a case of moving to neighbouring Spain, because there are so many obstacles in being able to export from Gibraltar. It means actually setting up a roasting plant in Spain. My final challenge.
And I would like to think that someone of the family, nephew or niece or some of the Sacarello would take it over to continue this tradition, which I think is marvellous to have been involved in, and I hope to be able to continue being involved with as long as possible.
We've only just scratched the surface, but it is a great story. A Genoese seafarer relocates to Gibraltar, starts a family, his grandson starts a business, which his grandsons continue to evolve passionately today. It's the sort of family story that provides a backbone to Gibraltar's prospering economy. Join us next week for a look at another hugely successful Gibraltar business with real heritage.